And now U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd have arrived in Seoul, where they will hold talks with their South Korean counterparts. Among the issues they will discuss are efforts at diplomacy with the DPRK. They will also meet President Moon Jae-in. On Tuesday, both men held talks with the top Japanese officials, including Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, to discuss ways of strengthening their alliance. It's the first such trip by senior Biden administration figures. U.S. and Japanese foreign and defense officials have warned against what they call coercion and destabilizing behavior by China after top-level talks in Tokyo. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded, saying the U.S.-Japan alliance should not target any third party. And the U.S.-Japan meeting comes before top officials from Beijing and Washington are to hold talks on Thursday. Now, Xin tells us more details.
Meeting close partners in Asia and reaffirming commitment to traditional allies.
We will continue to work together on core security issues like the denuclearization of North Korea and maritime security, and we'll stand up for our shared democratic values because we know that democracy and human rights are core elements of any stable and secure region.
The alliance is seen by some in Asia as a potential counterweight to a growing Chinese influence and alleged aggression in Asia-Pacific.
The security environment is becoming increasingly severe, so it is necessary for us to make the Japan-US alliance even stronger.
China says cooperation between Japan and the U.S. should benefit the entire region.
We believe that exchanges and cooperation between the United States and Japan should help enhance mutual understanding and trust, as well as unity and cooperation among countries in the region. It should contribute to the peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region, instead of targeting and damaging the interests of a third party.
Last week, China once again rejected allegations that it follows expansionist policies in the region and called for dialogue with Japan over maritime disputes.
We hope that Japan will honor the spirit of its four-point principled agreement with China, work together with China, and stop words and deeds that may lead to a more complicated situation.
On Thursday, the U.S. delegation will meet with senior Chinese officials Yang Jiechi, director of the Office of the Central Commission for Foreign Affairs, and Wang Yi, the foreign minister and state councillor. They're expected to discuss a range of issues, including trade and other issues of disagreement. Xin Ruinan, CGTN.
For more on the U.S. officials' visit to South Korea, let's go to our reporter Jack Barton in Seoul. Hello there, Jack. So what topics can we expect to see to be on the table?
There'll be a number of topics. For sure, China will be discussed, perhaps not to the degree, though, that South Korean officials were expecting. The expectation amongst officials I've spoken to was that there would be a lot of pressure for not just getting involved with the so-called Quad, the grouping between the United States, Japan, Australia and India, but to actually become a member. And I spoke to a senior official who will be involved with the talks yesterday, and he told me that one, there doesn't seem to be any pressure on South Korea in the prior communications to these meetings for that to happen. And secondly, he said in all of the communications about Indo-Pacific cooperation, there wasn't any specific mention of China. That could be because Seoul takes quite a different approach from Tokyo and wants good relations, very good relations with both Washington and Beijing, so it doesn't want to be a part of any arrangement which might disrupt that arrangement. Then again, conversations could change once those meetings start, but there is a lot to talk about. One is just reinvigorating the relationship between Seoul and Washington. That's a stated aim of these meetings. The relationship suffered a lot under the Trump administration. There's no other way of putting it. South Korea did not have the good relationship with the United States over the past 4 years that, say, Japan did. So getting that relationship back on track, a priority. Also getting the relationship between Seoul and Tokyo back on track, if that's possible. another stated aim. At the moment, that relationship is at its worst state since the end of the Second World War because of a series of legal cases from legacy issues resulting from the war that has led to a trade war between Japan and South Korea. Biden clear, keen to have his officials.
All right, that was our correspondent Jack Barton reporting from Seoul. Chinese and U.S. officials will be meeting on Thursday for their first in-person high-level talk since Biden came into office. It will take place in the American city of Anchorage, just below the Arctic Circle in Alaska. And the isolated location may seem like an odd place for such a meeting to take place. CGTN's Nathan King explains why it was chosen as the host city.
It's a light dusting, is it?
It is a light dusting.
Former Alaska Governor Bill Walker knows quite a bit about freezing weather.
Oh, from Valdez, where we get, we'll get 4 feet at a time.
4 feet? But like many others here this week, the governor wants to see a thaw in US-China relations after the deep freeze of the last few years.
I'm hopeful from the standpoint, I think that there are some issues that they need to resolve that are well outside the area of trade. And I think they're going to start with that.
Planned meetings here, led by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and China's most senior diplomat and Politburo member Yang Jiechi, are being called a one-off by the White House. Joined by new US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, this high-level meeting will occur here in Anchorage, roughly halfway between Washington and Beijing. It's a sub-zero scene reflecting where the relationship has been, but Alaska is also an epicenter for issues the two powers need to work on, like climate change and commerce.
China is our largest trade partner. They have been for 13 years, and largely with seafood, oil. The amount of oil that's shipped from Alaska to China has doubled from 2019 to 2020. So we have a lot of Asia is our market.
This meeting on the ice will happen after US officials have met with Asian allies Japan and the Republic of Korea. Bill Walker was governor the last time leading Chinese officials visited the Arctic state. He hosted Xi Jinping and his delegation after they had just held their first summit with then President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Since then, the US-China relationship has chilled, and while the US criticizes China on human rights from Hong Kong to Xinjiang, US political divisions and violence have tarnished Washington's image abroad. This independent-minded former governor is pushing to change that.
It does have a negative impact, and I'm all about jobs. I'm all about creating infrastructure and developing our resources responsibly. And it's hard to do that if there's too much partisanship associated. The economy should not be a partisan issue. Healthcare, I've always said, should not be a partisan issue. So there are certain things that just should be. You search for the right answer.
Well, we don't expect all issues to be solved, of course, in just this one meeting. What we're looking for is some sort of cooperation on the big issues like commerce, climate and COVID, rather than the divisions we've seen over the past few years. Nathan King, CGTN, Anchorage, Alaska.
And now Joseph Gregoire Mahoney is joining us from New Orleans. He's a professor of politics at East China Normal University. Professor, welcome to Global Watch. Well, Washington and Tokyo on Tuesday agreed to uphold a part of a security agreement between the two countries that would allow for the U.S. to intervene if Japan was attacked. How significant is this?
I think it's really nothing really new. On the one hand, a pact was already in place, and I don't think anyone really doubted it. So it's really just reaffirming something that no one really questioned. On the other hand, I don't think we're looking at any realistic scenario presently where Japan will be attacked by anyone. That includes both North and South Korea, given Japan's difficult relations with both.
So why this agreement is needed now?
Well, I think, again, it's a bit of a posturing, trying to amp up the relationship. Maybe it's a little bit of an antagonistic rhetoric ahead of the meeting. Maybe it's just reaffirming the relationship so that Japan doesn't worry that the United States is going to cut loose and pursue some sort of unilateral action with China in Anchorage.
Well, U.S. officials' meetings in Japan and South Korea come right after President Biden met with members of the court and also just before the first high-level talks between Washington and Beijing after Biden took office. Can you tell us how we can read the U.S. strategy here?
I think there are several points in mind. The first is that the Indo-Pacific or Quad concept appears to be firming its position by retreating from some of its more forcefully worded, previously outlined strategic ambitions. You know, it was notable that the statement co-authored by the leaders of the U.S., Japan, India, and Australia, published recently in the Washington Post, never mentioned China by name, and that it emphasized various areas of cooperation that have nothing to do with a China containment strategy. I think it's clear that all four countries have strategic objectives when it comes to China, and to a certain extent these overlap, but not as much as some like to imagine. Furthermore, there seems to be some wariness with Washington's leadership and consistency, and above all, that none can actually afford presently to escalate tensions with China. But in terms of strategy, first, as I noted, Biden must consult with Quad members before meeting with China, otherwise they will think he's cutting them loose in favor of a unilateral approach to bilateral China-U.S. ties. Second, it's also clear that China wants to that Washington wants to milk this meeting for some leverage ahead of talks with Beijing.
So it's not only a symbolic meeting among the four countries. Do you sense any differences in terms of approach to Asia between Biden and his predecessors?
I think we're learning three things with this administration. First, I think it's fair to say that the U.S. position on the Quad strategy appears to have softened a bit. Second, the U.S. appears to want to position itself as an agent representing these other countries' interests, in part to bring more issues to the table when it meets Chinese officials in Alaska. Third, by somewhat softening and inflating its position simultaneously, this is a kind of beach ball approach to diplomacy, one that offers possibly an opening for a grand bargain where China can potentially solve a number of issues simultaneously, which Beijing might find more politically palatable than facing each country one by one. Conversely, it might simply overload the whole process and lead to further entrenchment.
All right, thank you very much indeed for an insight. Professor Joseph Gregoire Mahoney of politics at East China Normal University. Now you're watching Global Watch on CGTN, still ahead.